I want to welcome you to this panel, which means a lot to a lot of us, women in peace and security. First, we're happy UN Day. UN Day was yesterday. I can't think of a better subject than women to celebrate the UN. Why? Well, first of all, it's half the world. So I think we owe it to them to do something about it. Tomorrow, the Security Council is having an important meeting. It is celebrating the 10th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325. And I can see already what's going on in your mind. And you are saying, but close to 500 women were mass raped in Congo recently. What is there to celebrate? Well, I can tell you there is a lot to celebrate. And I want to share with you the excitement of this. And having been myself in peacekeeping operation, I can tell you that 10 years ago, the Council would not have pronounced the word rape. And there was no normative framework to talk about this. And the evolution of this framework has been fascinating. So I just very quickly want to introduce the subject, and then I will give the floor and introduce to you this group of fascinating speakers. And I want you to welcome them because of foreign ministers coming tomorrow to the Security Council, because of Hillary Clinton being in the Council, of Bachelet, the former president of Chile, being in the Council tomorrow. There are lots of things going on at night, tonight, dinners and things, and panels, and it's very competitive. And these speakers gave priority to SIPA. So please welcome them. So special about Resolution 1325. Why are we celebrating something? Because it is the first time, it's really a landmark Security Council resolution, it is the first time that the organ which has the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security recognized the link between the security of women and peace. It is that resolution which did it, and the resolution therefore has two parts. One is the protection of women, and the other one, so it's the victim aspect of women, the women who are being used in conflict and who take the brunt in those conflicts and in war. And then there is the other side of 1325, which is women as agents of change and women as peace builders. They rebuild the social fabric of society after a conflict. So the resolution has two parts. Tonight we are going to discuss, obviously, the two sides, and I just want to tell you that, it was not easy to push this in the Council and to recognize that there was a relationship between peace and violence against women. And there were two other resolutions which came. The last one was last year, and it was pushed by Hillary Clinton in the Security Council, which called for the designation of a special representative against violence against women, and that is, as you know, Margot Wallström from Sweden. But also, the two resolutions pushed the issue of protection and devised a mechanism whereby sanctions can be applied to perpetrators of sexual violence against women, and that was completely unprecedented as well. So in a way, there is a lot to celebrate on the normative change. Just very quickly, because I know that Jürgen Heysel from Austria will talk to you more about that, but I just wanted to tell you that if 1325 passed 10 years ago, it's thanks to, not to the permanent members of the Security Council. As a matter of fact, sometimes there were spoilers. And I can tell you that Russia, China, and the United States were very much against it at the beginning. On the ground that women and gender are soft, quote-unquote, soft issue and should not be dealt with by the Security Council. They should go to the General Assembly or to ECOSOC. And there was lots of resistances about talking about women by the Security Council, so to speak. So it stands to, don't ever think that this is the agenda of the North. Don't ever think that because it is about human rights, about women, this is really pushed by the North. It was the ambassador of Bangladesh, Ghana, Jamaica, Namibia, South Africa, who pushed that first. And they really pushed it. I remember Ambassador Chowdhury in 2000 pushing this in the Council, and the Council refusing to consider the issue as a separate issue on its agenda because of the soft aspect of it. So then came Italy, then came Belgium, and Austria has taken a very strong now push. But you see, those are elected countries for 2 years. They are not the permanent members of the Council. And since 2007, the United States has changed completely and has become very interested in helping with the issue of sexual abuse against women in conflicts. But that is kind of recently. So I want now to introduce you very quickly all our speakers. They are incredible speakers. I will just start the way it is. Jürgen Heisel is at the permanent mission of Austria, and he will take the floor first because he has to leave at 7:15 to go and get his foreign minister at the airport. But he has been really negotiating in the Council with various countries what is going to happen tomorrow in the Security Council. And I know that a lot of students are going to come with me to the Council, and I'm excited for you to see what we don't know exactly, perhaps Jürgen knows, but one of the things that the Council wanted to ask the Secretary General is to set up indicators which would be used to measure the resolution 1525. And it is those indicators which are being negotiated, and we do not know, and maybe you can tell us, Jürgen, if the Council will accept them. I think there are more than 20 indicators at this stage. And, you know, I'd like you to talk about the dynamic of the negotiations and what we may expect, who is against what, and what are the problems. We also are very lucky to have today with us Betty Ashan Ogwaro. She comes from southern Sudan. You know, they are one of the aspects of 1325 is to put more women, to make them participate in negotiation and peace processes, because there are very few of them. And she is the only woman who has participated in a peace negotiation with the Lord Resistance Army. And she will tell you what it means to be a woman in a negotiation like this. She will also talk to you about the women in southern Sudan and how worried they are about the referendum and what may happen to them. I don't know if I should introduce you Judy Chang. She's a former alumna of SIPA. She's back home. So I hope she will be a role model for you. It's very inspiring. She has done very interesting things. She was the deputy. You were in the High Commissioner of Refugees, UNHCR. She worked with WFP, with UNDP. So here you are, the women who are at SIPA. Here is what you may become in a few years. And she is now the head of the Peacebuilding Commission Support Office, the ASG for that office. So thank you for coming and to SIPA, back to your school. Atul Khare is what we call in our jargon at the UN the number 2 in peacekeeping operation, meaning that he is the deputy to the Under Secretary General. He's an Assistant Secretary General from India, which is a very important contributor to peacekeeping operation. And he went to Congo to investigate the mass rapes which happened not very long time ago. And he will talk to you about all the aspects which touch peacekeeping operation in 1325, but one of the main ones is the issue of protection. So here it is. You can ask all the questions you want to ask, you know, how about this issue, which is so crucial. And last but not least is Barbara Crossett, who is a journalist, who was a foreign correspondent of the New York Times, and I remember her with fondly when I was working with Kofi Annan. We often saw her, and she has a feel for issues. She's always sniffing at something. And she was sent, I think, by UNFPA to, where you sent by them to 7 countries recently, the last one being Haiti, to talk to the women and to ask them what happened since 1325. So she's going to talk to you about what she heard, about the voices from the field. So without taking the floor much longer, I just want to give the floor to Jürgen first. Thank you. You want to stay there?
Well, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Lindenmayer, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. The 10th anniversary of Resolution 1325 is a very important issue for my country and the Council, and we have indeed been working on this for several months already to prepare tomorrow's day on the Council. And I will try to be brief and in this short time give you a bit of an overview on where the Council currently stands with the whole Women, Peace and Security agenda, talk a little bit about the challenges that we are facing and all the gaps that we still have and that we are trying to address, and why those gaps are there and why it is difficult to address them. And then, of course, we'll be very happy to give you a kind of an outlook on what the Council is going to adopt tomorrow, because yes, indeed, we have finished our negotiations about half an hour ago, and there will be something that the Council is going to adopt tomorrow. Well, after 10 years, I think in your introduction, we've already heard a lot on where we do stand. I think it's important to say that the agenda of Women, Peace and Security is also very much linked to other agendas on the Council, and there have been subsequent developments after the adoption of this landmark resolution, which, yes, for the first time actually brought this thematic approach into the Security Council, making sure that the Security Council consistently addresses the needs or the specific problems of women in armed conflict in the work throughout its country situations. We have in subsequent years adopted 3 more resolutions under the agenda item of Women, Peace and Security, 2 of them on sexual violence in armed conflict, 1 of them establishing the office of an SRSG on sexual violence, 1 creating a team of experts which can be deployed to countries with specific or really widespread problems of sexual violence to assist those countries in addressing those problems. We have also last year adopted another resolution, 1889, which was taking up particularly the focus of post-conflict reconstruction, of peace building, and the specific needs of women and girls in this setting. But then also other resolutions have brought important developments to this agenda, because, for example, there is another agenda on children and armed conflict on the Council, which for the first time has extended its scope to sexual violence. So, of course, there is the whole, unfortunately, the whole age range of victims of sexual violence. So, especially for children and girls that fall victim to sexual violence, this is also being addressed now in under the children and armed conflict agenda. So, basically, the Council has a very good normative framework. What is the problem that we are still facing? That's the implementation. And there are still some serious gaps in the implementation. I think one of the most important is, and I think it has been mentioned already, we just heard the news about this appalling wave of rapes and sexual violence in the DRC, and one of the major problems is the lack of accountability and the still prevailing impunity for the perpetrators. And the Council has taken some steps on that. For example, in the context of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, sexual violence has been made part of the criteria to revert to sanctions and targeted measures. So parties or specific commanders of those parties in armed conflict that do use sexual violence there, they will face targeted measures. So I think that was already an important step. And also the new SRSG has been briefing those sanctions committees. So I think we are moving ahead, but then of course there's still much more to be done. The other big gap that we have is when it comes to monitoring and accountability in the implementation of the resolution. For example, on children and armed conflict, there is a working group that regularly meets and that can adopt conclusions and recommendations for those states that commit violations against children. We have been continuously arguing for a similar working group in the field of women, peace and security. But so far, the Council could not find agreement on this. But it would be important because you would really have a dedicated capacity on the Council that would regularly meet and regularly review those issues and make sure that they really make their way into all the country-specific considerations on the Council, because I think mainstreaming is the way how we have to take that agenda forward. Then another gap is, and we hopefully will get more and some improvements here, is that we need more consistent and comprehensive reporting on the whole situation of women in situations of armed conflict, data on sexual violence, patterns of sexual violence. We need to know more about the number of women participating in negotiations. We need to know more information about what the quality of their participation is there. Are they really just sitting there, or are they people that can influence the negotiations? So all this still needs to be added to the overall reporting to the Council in a more consistent manner. Then the last, well, not the last gap, but another very significant gap is prevention and early warning. Unfortunately, the Council has always been fairly weak on this, because there's many member states that have always argued that the Council can only review situations that are officially on the agenda of the Council. But once they are on the agenda, it's usually too late. We have to be able to consider those situations beforehand. So what we need is information as early as possible that the situation is deteriorating for women. There are serious crimes or even patterns of sexual violence happening, so that the Council can take that up before it's actually really on the agenda. And so it's an information gap, plus it's the willingness on the Council. And well, and for all that, as I said before, we need something that allows us to measure progress, to really know where we stand. And this is something that we have been aiming for, actually we did get it, and this will be adopted by the Council tomorrow, and this will be a comprehensive set of indicators to measure progress in the implementation of Resolution 1325. How can you imagine those indicators? Basically, the indicators are trying to take up all the provisions that are part of Resolution 1325 on prevention, on women's participation, on protection issues, plus on specific fields of peacebuilding and early reconstruction. So some of those indicators are, for example, taking just the number of cases, reported cases of sexual violence, but also how many cases of those have been investigated and prosecuted. It will also be, there will be indicators on the number of women in peacekeeping operations, money that has really specifically been dedicated to projects benefiting women and girls in a post-conflict setting. This whole set of indicators will be endorsed by the Council tomorrow. And we hope that the information that we will get out of those indicators will then be part of those reports, and will give the Council a better understanding of where we stand. And also member states will be invited to use them in their national implementation, meaning that member states that have a national action plan, for example, should also measure their own progress when implementing or supporting the implementation of Resolution 1325. So it will not be linked to just countries in armed conflict. And I think, I mean, we have with this really achieved a major step that will really allow us to also assess and evaluate everything that we've done before in a better way, because we will see what actions have worked, what has not worked, what approaches we have to adapt, what has really been the impact on the ground. And I think this is a very important step to link the work of the Council to what's actually happening on the ground. Maybe just 2-3 other remarks on the dynamics. I think the difficulties that we are facing with women, peace and security in the everyday work of the Council, as I said before, is to really make sure that everybody who is sitting there takes up those issues every day in every context where it's relevant. This is also very much a coordination issue amongst ourselves within missions, but you can imagine with a mainstreaming approach, on every country there's somebody else sitting, so we really have to make an effort there to be more consistent ourselves. Then of course it's difficult to take this whole agenda forward, because yes, it is a security issue, but it's got underlying causes that have to be addressed as well. And I think it's fair to say that both the lack of participation as well as the fact that women are being targeted for sexual violence is still also an equality issue. It's often a lack of empowerment. So it's difficult to really separate this. And in UN terms, that means that the whole advancement and equality issues are part of the General Assembly, whereas security is what the Security Council is responsible for. And that is something that where we still face difficulties to bridge that gap and make sure that also the Council looks into those issues. But I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I understand from what you said that the Council will agree to the indicators tomorrow. That's really good news. We didn't know. So there is something to celebrate then. I'm going to go against all protocol here. We are not at the United Nations, so I will do it the SIPA way. And we just heard that there is the problem of knowing how many women have been raped, or there is no reporting like we have for the children. There is the issue of prevention, that the Council cannot take an issue if it hasn't happened already. So I would like to really ask Betty Ochan. Perhaps she is listening to all this. She's from Southern Sudan. There is a referendum coming soon, as you know, with potential of violence. And certainly a lot of pitfalls for the women, because the North and the South, as you know, may split and different laws may apply, and the North will have Sharia law and the South will be Christian. I would like you to tell us, there are very few women who have been in peace negotiations. As I told you, that is one of the aspects of 1325, which has not really moved on. But you have been there. And you are from Southern Sudan. How do you listen to the members of the Security Council saying all this and talking about protection? And then we'll hear Peacekeeping telling us about protection. What does it mean for you?
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be in this famous university which I've been hearing about, and today I have the opportunity to see it and meet with you. Indeed, when we hear the Security Council, member of the Security Council talking about the Agenda 1325, to us in the Southern Sudan is very, people are celebrating in the UN today, 10th anniversary. Many women in Southern Sudan only heard about Security Council. Some of them only heard when I said I was going to the celebration. And then they asked me, what is that Security Council 1325 about? Because there's so much happening that they get involved in the things around them rather than to listen to what is happening in the world. We in the Sudan have been in war for the last 55 years, which only came to, I would call, it came to a ceasefire, although they said it a comprehensive peace agreement in the year 2005. So since 1955 to the year 2005, Sudan had been in war. And all this period, it is the women who took all the burden. It is the women who were raped. It is the women who bore children out of hate, because there was this war between the North and the South. And today somebody asked me, why do you say you're from Southern Sudan? Because they don't understand why is the Sudan having a Sudan and a Southern Sudan. Sudan is a big country. A Southern Sudan is a place where the indigenous Sudanese lived. Now we have the rulers who live in the center. So the Southern Sudanese found the comfort of saying, we are Southern Sudanese because we are black, we are Christian, and the others are not. But the problem is, the war in Southern Sudan took a hate turn. So the hate is now implemented on the women, because the men will come and rape, the men from the North will rape the women from the South, the men from the South will rape the women from the North, out of hate. But who is there to protect them? Not even the UN. After the peace agreement was signed, then there was the mandate for the UN peacekeeping force to go to Southern Sudan. But as you heard, they don't have enough mandate to protect the people. In Southern Sudan, they were only given the mandate up to 6, which means they can only monitor. Women were raped in front of the peacekeeping forces, but because they don't have the mandate to protect them, they would watch and then write a report to the UN in New York, and UN headquarters in New York, that, oh, a number of women or a woman was raped in front of us at this place at this time. What's the use of writing a report if you cannot protect the woman? Then here comes also the war in Darfur. I'm sure many of you have heard about Darfur rather than about Southern Sudan. In Darfur, UN has the mandate, up to 7, to protect the people, but they don't have the capacity. They don't have the number of the keepers are few. Even those who are there don't have the means to protect, They even don't have enough vehicle to move them from one place to another or a place where things are happening. And if they're there, maybe they don't even have the helicopter to monitor the area. The place is so big. So you find that it becomes a bit difficult and meaningless to the women on the ground. Recently, women have been campaigning that, okay, I think it is better to increase the number of women peacekeepers, because probably they will understand better the issues of women. And definitely in Darfur, more women peacekeepers were deployed and put around the IDP camps, internal displaced camps. These women in uniform actually give the women the comfort. So if they see anything happening, they can run to the women and say, oh, something is happening. And there is a comfort zone a bit there. However, with all this happening, UN still say, we don't have the data. How can we prove that women were raped in Darfur or in southern Sudan? Definitely, they don't have the data. Because women in Sudan don't have the capacity to collect data. How would they collect data if they're busy protecting themselves, if they're busy protecting their families, if they're busy running around because they have to protect themselves? So women then ask the question, can UN provide a section that can collect data? Then the UN also goes saying, we don't have the capacity to place the people to collect data. So it goes in a vicious circle. When will it end? We are asking the UN to improve so that this should end. But the most important thing is the three pillars, the three Ps of the Security Council 1325. The protection, which I've talked about, and the participation, the promotion, the prevention, and early warning. Participation is one thing women say we must be there in order to improve the situation. Women want to participate in the peace negotiations. They want to sit on the table because if they are there, at least the issue of women would be brought up on the table. When I was appointed in the mediation team, mediating between the LRA and the government of Uganda, I was the only woman sitting there. And every time I look around, I tell the men, I said, I am a minority in this mediation. So we need to increase the number of women. So Uganda government, you need to have a woman in your team. The LRA, you need to have a woman in your team. And definitely, the LRA appointed a woman. The Uganda government dragged their feet. But when they appointed a woman, at least there were 3 women now sitting there who can conspire at night. At night, I will go to the women. I say, what is going on? Are you happy with that? There's no women agenda in this agenda of today. Can we put in more flesh in this? I will go to the LRA side, talk to the woman. I will go to the government side, talk to the woman. And then I say, you women, you should talk one language. Because when it comes into compensation, for example, you want to see your sister who was raped compensated, regardless if that sister was from the LRA side or it was from the government side. You want to see your families compensated, not the man getting the money, but the woman getting the money. So you need to talk one language. It doesn't matter that you are sitting on opposite sides of the table. Slowly, slowly, we started really agreeing that it is true, women must bring the women agenda on the table, regardless of which side they're sitting. So when the 2 women started talking almost similar, then the chief mediator said, is there something going on here? Why are these women talking the same language? Are you consulting yourselves? Then I told him, women's issues are always the same. Whether it is a woman in Africa, whether it is a woman in Europe, where you will hear the story is the same. So if these women are talking the same language, they are coming from the same place. And then, when we went to have Joseph Kony to come and actually sit on the negotiation table, he said he wouldn't do it. And then I asked him, why would you not come and sit on the negotiation table? He said, they have issued the warrant of arrest against me, the ICC. Do you want me to be arrested and killed? Then I said, okay, so death is painful? Do you realize that death is painful? And yet you kill innocent women and children? Why don't you kill your mother first? She's still alive. And then you feel the pain of death. Then he sat up and said, I want to talk to my mother. and said, okay, we will get your mother. And we hope your mother will tell you that what you are doing is not right, being a son of a woman. Because it is not right to allow your soldiers to rape women. They take very young children from schools, 13 years old, rape them and then distribute them to the soldiers. These are babies. So we started campaigning really seriously against all this impunity, but we couldn't get any government to punish any man. Sudan is run on a two system. In the north, it is run on an Islamic system. So for a woman to say, I was raped, the law would say, okay, bring 4 witnesses who were there when you were being raped. Is it possible that a woman is going to bring 4 people to witness that she was raped? That's another way for men saying, we don't want to listen to rape. And in other occasions, men will tell us, but what is rape? What has changed? Then we say, no, you are looking at it from the wrong angle. So 1325, when the UN ratified it in the year 2000, women in Sudan had already been, without knowing, talking about the agendas of 1325. Now, let us look at the referendum which is coming. I don't know if all of you ever heard about the referendum which is coming in Southern Sudan. You have heard. The referendum is only less than 2 months away. It is going to happen, should happen on the 9th of January 2011. We already know that there are a lot of statements that tell us that there will be war. If the South decides to separate, the government of Khartoum is not accepting it. So they are preparing to stage another war. When we have been in war for 55 years, they don't want to let the oil-rich state of the Southern Sudan go, and even Southern Sudan said, you take the state, but leave us to go. Still, they don't want that. They are even saying openly, the ministers in Khartoum, the Minister of Information, the Minister of Culture, just recently in the media and when they say, oh, you Southerners who are living in Northern Sudan, should you decide to vote for separation, then know that you will be dismissed from your jobs. Those who are in universities will be dismissed from schools. These statements are already early warning statements to say war will happen. But what is this Security Council, UN Security Council doing about it? It is time now to stop it. It is time to say, we have heard it. It is coming. We don't want it to happen. But I haven't heard a sentence from the Security Council. I hope it will come up tomorrow, that they will do something about the referendum and that the referendum of Southern Sudan will go on peacefully. Because women are tired of wars. Women know if war comes again, they will be raped again. Women know if it comes again, they will again be victim of sitting at home nursing these wounded soldiers or husbands, or they become widows again, or they are tired. We are even campaigning that the UN Security Council should beef up the security, especially at the borders between the north and the south, if they can put a buffer zone, so that the army from the north, the Sudan Armed Forces, could not cross to fight in the south, nor even our army, the Sudan People's Liberation Army. So we need a buffer zone between the south and the north, so that war at least should be avoided. But the Security Council, in their statement I read last week, were saying, maybe we will do something. We don't want the word something. We want to say, yes, we will put a buffer zone there, yes, we will put 10,000 people, or yes, we will put what. This is what we want to hear, not that they will do something. So when he's talking about early warning system, and yet when they know there are some early warning system and UN is not doing something, then I wonder, what type of early warning system again are you looking for? Because this is a ripe case. This is a case that is really there. And if the UN does not do it now, they will regret. Because again, people will go into war. Again, we'll go into the vicious circle of protecting women, providing food. We are tired of relief food. Sudanese are tired of getting relief. Sudanese want to cultivate. Sudan is an agricultural country. We want to cultivate. We want to eat from our farms. We want to be independent. Women want to be empowered. But we don't want to go back to relief because of the war. So UN, please, we are asking the Security Council to do something now, because it should have happened yesterday. Thank you.
So what is Peacekeeping Operation going to do to protect the women of Southern Sudan? And I just wanted, just before I give the floor to ASG Carey, I wanted to remind you that when you say the UN, when we say the UN, we have to be careful of whom we are talking about. It is the Security Council who authorize. No, I'm not talking about what you said. I'm talking to the students, because usually you say the UN, but I just wanted to tell you it is the Security Council who authorizes the peacekeeping operation. So if we want to put a buffer zone between the North and the South, the Council should have done it yesterday already, because it takes time for the Council. So I'm just provoking Austria here. But then there is a question of resources. How many men are you going to authorize to deploy in a big country, like in a big region, new country like Southern Sudan? Because I would like, certainly, and I'm sure you will, I would like to hear statistics about how many soldiers per women who have to be protected and how many peacekeepers per kilometers we are going to have to do this protection mandate. So that is the implementation of what the Council is authorizing, and I want to give the floor to ASG Carey and ask him to talk to us very frankly and honestly about this issue of protection.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Dear colleagues, I won't be able to do justice to the very heartfelt sentiments which were expressed by Betty, which built upon what Jürgens was saying and took us to virtually a crescendo. So what I will say might sound a bit pedestrian, but finally I do believe that everything is built bit by bit. It is not possible to build everything today or tomorrow or yesterday. Let me begin first and foremost by 1325, and to say that in our view, as Elizabeth was saying, your director, that adoption of 1325 did indeed change the way in which business is conducted by the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations and my integrated department, the Department of Field Support. You can look in the Security Council report, which is available, how successive statements were made by the two Undersecretary Generals, Jean-Marie Guénot earlier, and now my colleague Ellen Leroy, on this particular issue, which demonstrate an evolution of the thinking within the Department of Peacekeeping Operation, particularly progress in terms of gender-sensitive policies, increased participation, the first P, which you are talking about, of women, not only in peace negotiations, but in electoral and in constitutional processes. Just to give you one example, I was the special representative in Timor-Leste, a small half-island country very far away from here, for about 3 years, from 2006 to 2009. And as the special representative, I insisted on a policy that while every month I was meeting all the political leaders of 14 different political parties together of that country, but every third meeting of this nature was actually with women political party leaders and not with men political party leaders. And this initially, when we started the process in 2006, it created an uproar. In fact, I got many messages in local newspapers saying that I should go back to my own country, go back to the UN, this is not the Timorese way of doing things. But later on, situation bit by bit changed. So I think we have done somewhat better on participation. We have also done somewhat better on promoting gender-sensitive policies within ourselves and, of course, in the countries in which we find ourselves. But at the same point of time, because a reference was made to the number of women peacekeepers, I think we are doing reasonably well as far as civilian peacekeepers are concerned. You know, the SRSGs, the heads of various departments, the human rights, the political officers, the civilian officers. We are doing comparatively okay, comparatively. In the police side, where about roughly we have now started a global effort to have increased participation of women police officers of the UN police, to increase it at least up to 20%. Currently, we are around 14.5%. But in military terms, we do very poorly. Military terms, only 2.4% of our military are women. The percentage increases to about 4%, 4.14%, if we talk of military observers as opposed to the real military. But that is again very low. Of course, there are many reasons to it. There are some countries which do not permit women's participation in the military sphere to begin with. And these are type of challenges which we are encountering, but we are grappling with. What we have not done well, I think we have certainly not done well when it comes to protection, particularly protection, as Betty was saying, of women and girl children from sexual violence. I'm the first to acknowledge, and some of you might have perhaps seen, or you can look it up on the website, my report to the Security Council when I returned back from Congo. Although there was a bit of a misquote, they quoted saying UN acknowledges failure or UN has failed. I did say that we too have failed. That is correct, but the word was too, because we must recall that first and foremost the responsibility for protection lies on the society, lies on the country, lies on the people themselves. We are there to assist. So we too have failed, yes, but the failure first and foremost is that of the country, and until and unless the women's status is enhanced, until and unless adequate capacities, which were referred to by Betty, are provided to the country first and foremost to enhance its judiciary, to enhance its police, to make its fight against impunity a reality, it is unlikely that things would change. If I was to take an example, let us assume that somebody has a suppurating wound. Then while you provide antibiotics or other medicines to the person, but you also bandage the wound so that it does not, it can heal properly. Peacekeeping is that bandage. But if you just keep on putting a bandage without providing the medicine, it's not going to work. Then the wound will suppurate somewhere else. And you will keep on providing bandages one after another without any real change in the situation of the country. And that is why enhancement, as Jürgen said, in a broad, holistic sense, of the condition of a country, the socio-economic condition of women, the strengthening of rule of law in the judiciary, a better police, and a political negotiation to solve the essential political problem is absolutely essential. Let me come very quickly to some of the gaps which we have. And one of them was particularly mentioned, and I was delighted to hear that gap being mentioned by Betty, and that is the question of helicopters. Just to give you an example. In 16 peacekeeping operations overall, we require 137 helicopters, not a very big number, say about 9 helicopters per mission. The number which we have, 69. So less than, slightly more than half of our requirement. Half of our requirement of helicopters is not available at all. Who are our main suppliers of helicopters? Russian Federation, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Ethiopia. I am thankful to them. Nigeria, Niger. Do you really believe that these are the people who should be supplying helicopters to peacekeeping operation? We go around. We ask the people. About 6 months ago, I sent requests to about 60 countries. I would not name them. Asking me to provide some helicopters because we need them to enhance our operations. The replies which I got can be described in a single-digit round figure. That is the reply which I got from those 62 countries. So that is the type of challenge. You know, there is no point in talking unless we can provide the adequate capacity, the adequate resources for our people to assist the countries in which they find themselves. Briefly on the protection of civilians, you are aware that there are 7 peacekeeping operations which we currently have out of 16, where protection of civilians is a specifically mandated task by the Security Council. Those operations, apart of course from MONUSCO, include operations such as the Côte d'Ivoire, of course. It includes our operation in MINUSTA in Haiti. It includes our operation in Darfur, which was being mentioned, of course. It includes our operation in Lebanon called UNIFIL. It includes Liberia, UNMISS, which is Sudan, and of course MONUSCO, which is where I will refer to in a little bit. I think in all these places there are some approaches which have been taken. For example, let's take the example of Haiti first. After the earthquake, we realized that the challenge would be essentially with IDP camps, because people are divorced from their natural environment, they are living in very small cloistered spaces, and therefore the chances of rape or sexual violence are very high. And therefore there was a strategic policing plan which was prepared. This included deployment of women police officers, deployment of Haitian police officers, Bangladeshi women police. It involved UN military and police unit, higher frequency, both day and night patrols, permanent presence, community violence reduction programs through employment generation. So some of them were tried. This is not to say that everything is hunky-dory. It is not. But at the same point of time, I think we need to progress even further than what we have gone. On DRC, I want to clearly mention that first and foremost, and this applies not only to DRC but to all other countries, protection of civilians has got two components. One component is protection of individuals against imminent danger. Now that is very difficult. In DRC we have got 20,000 peacekeepers, which means what? Which means one peacekeeper for 48 square kilometers. You cannot cover 48 square kilometers with one person. That's impossible. When we talk of intelligence gathering, there are member states who don't want to listen to the word intelligence. And intelligence gathering in itself is a big problem. In number of people, 20,000 peacekeepers in DRC actually translates as roughly one peacekeeper per 10,000 to 11,000 people. Again, therefore, individual protection becomes a bit of a misnomer. So what we have to look at are structures for protection, which means greater development, extension of legitimate state authority, enhancement of the status of women, assisting in the justice sector, and so on and so forth. Second thing, and I was quite happy to hear from Jurgens that targeted sanctions are now on the agenda. I myself called for targeted sanctions against those who bear command responsibility for the rapes and for violence against women, and we are happy to see that at least one of them, Kalishte, has been arrested in France under an ICC warrant, and the latest race would be added to that warrant. This would perhaps hopefully send the right signal. And then, of course, we have what we need to do better, we as peacekeepers. Even though I laid out for you the challenges, but even within those challenges, we need to do better by enhancing our efforts to have a better communication with the people, to have some systems by which the people can come in contact with us. This means simple things like engaging greater number of community liaison interpreters, engaging women as community liaison interpreters, establishing some sort of a mobile network system, establishing some sort of a radio network system, and of course undertaking more frequent and more unpredictable patrols so that people cannot disappear into the canopy of forests when the patrol goes around, because they don't know what time the patrol is going to go. So these are some of the challenges which I have mentioned to you, and I want to stop here. I have refrained from commenting on Sudan broadly, but I will tell you two things. I think we need to have a good plan so that the horrendous picture which was painted by Betty for us does not become a reality. And that involves not only a buffer zone, but that involves a clear messaging to both parties to the conflict that a return to war, exploitation of women, violence against women would not be accepted. And there would be consequences which they will have to bear if they do that. That's one. Second, enhancing political negotiation, and I'm not revealing to you a secret. There is going to be a meeting which will commence on 27th of October in Addis Ababa, perhaps in Mekele, where the two parties would again be brought together with a view to seeing if there can be a package deal to avoid this type of a crisis. This meeting will continue from 27 October to 5 November, and I hope that it will produce results. Thirdly, apart from the buffer zone, we have to realize that people do not necessarily fight as armies. They fight through proxies. So they might use the LRA, they might use the small ethnic groups to create trouble in non-border areas. And therefore, there has to be some mechanism to identify those specific areas, those specific hot areas, and to deploy there in a preventive mode. And these are issues which are being discussed, and I hope that they will lead to positive results. I'll stop there, and of course, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for explaining the challenges of protection. We have talked about women as victims just now, but Betty also said that women were tired of taking care of the wounded, of taking care of the old people who are maimed, of having children by the people who raped them. They are the one after a war and a conflict who really rebuild society. I can tell you, I have seen it in Rwanda, I have seen it in Somalia, I have seen it all over the place. If I ever write a book, I will dedicate it to the women that I saw in conflicts. They have moved me to tears. Their resiliency in Haiti, wherever, is something that will never stop surprising me, and says a lot about human condition, by the way. But that is the hopeful side. So I want now, Judy, I don't want you to talk about the positive side, about women as builders, women as agents of change, because that is something that people don't talk enough about. Please.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And it's nice to be home. And don't ask what year I graduated. Just to give you a hint, it was before it was called SIPA. It was actually called SIA in those days. So that gives you an idea of the decade we're talking about. I think it's been really great hearing so many different perspectives this evening. But I think, and I'll come to the bright side later, but I think the one point is it actually, after what Betty and what Atul said, it took 50 years for the international community to realize that there is this link between war, peace, security, and gender. It took them 50 years to coin 1325. So, and yet, all of us read in the papers, it was not a secret thing. I mean, we've been reading, we've been getting reports of what was happening, even back then in the Balkans, in Guatemala and Central America. I mean, this is not something new that's happening in Africa. It's all over the world where this kind of conflict takes place. But anyway, 10 years down the line, I think, yes, Elizabeth says that there's progress in the sense that people are willing to utter the word rape. But I would make the point, though, that the progress has still been modest. I think it's been modest. And if we look at the statistics, 10 years afterwards, of women involved in negotiations, women as mediators. You can go down the whole list of indicators of how women have been brought into the picture. And it's pathetic. The women as negotiators is what, 3%, and women as mediators, as chief mediators, 0. And then when you look at financing, you think that financing, at least after the enthusiasm of 1325, would be increased. But if you look at the statistics again, if you looked at we in my office we studied post-conflict financing, ODA in countries coming out of conflict, and we found that less than 3-4%, maybe 5% at most, were dedicated towards gender issues. So, in other words, I would tend to characterize it as business as usual. It's been business as usual, despite the 10 years that 1325 has been passed. So why should we why should this Women of Women and Peace and Security be such an important element of everything that we do? I think you already heard from everybody, all three panelists. And I would just stress here that the way I see it is women, yes, are the ultimate victims, and you've already heard Betty talk about them. You know, they lose out not just in sexual violence, but in inheritance law. You know, most women in many of these cultures cannot inherit whatever little their husbands had, because that was not in the law. I mean, and the husband's family would basically take everything, and if they're not nice, they would basically boot the woman out. We've heard so many stories of that. So there's all this law, inheritance law, and land law, and all that makes it very almost impossible for women to benefit. And of course, you know, during war, husbands die, sons die, daughters die, and women are basically left to fend for themselves. But the bright side is women are also the ultimate agents of change. And when you see stories, when you hear stories, because, you know, working in peace building, of course, I only go to countries coming out of conflict. So I spend my time between the Burundis, the Sierra Leones, the Liberias of this world. And when you go to these countries, you realize how strong the women's voices have been. I mean, everybody knows about the story of the Liberian women, the so-called market women, who showed up every day dressed in white to protest against the war. They even followed Charles Taylor to Ghana during a negotiation and literally just sat outside the steps and basically pressurized Charles Taylor to succumb to some conditions that were necessary. And Burundi, same thing. Women's involvement in the process in Arusha, and in Sudan, as has been described by Betty. So women are ultimate agents of change. Why? It's really not rocket science at all. Why? Because women are the caretakers. They take care of their children, and they want their children to have a normal life, free from war. Simple as that. They want more than anything for their children to grow up, and things like power and whatnot is the last things on their mind. You know, what drives war. So I would agree with generalization that women are better peacemakers, you know, are better at peacemakers and peace builders. I hope my men friends agree. So as I said, but despite the rhetoric, it's been business as usual, and that's why my office was asked in response to Security Council Resolution 1889 to prepare the Secretary General's report on women and peace building, which the Secretary General just presented to the Security Council last week, or the week before last. And basically this document takes as a point of departure that, you know, what has been done so far, despite nice resolutions in 1325, has been ad hoc and add-on. So when it comes to money, it's always an add-on. When it comes to other initiatives, it's ad hoc. You know, when there's a women's conference in Beijing, and then suddenly if everybody feels guilty, then they take action, you know, for that period, and then quickly forget. So it's been ad hoc and add-on, and that's why this report that my office just prepared comes up with a 7-point action plan to put meat into this problem, you know, to make a structural and systematic change, if you wish, in the way we do business, so that we can no longer hide behind, you know, nice words and generalities without these changes. And there are seven, as I said, there are seven points, action points. And as you can imagine, they range from women's role in negotiations, in mediation, and all that. But there are two in particular that I would like to highlight to you that I think are very interesting. One is we recommend that at least 15% of all post-conflict budgets, post-conflict aid budgets managed by the UN and the multi-donor trust funds, etc., be dedicated towards women and peace building, towards women's role. And this 15%, some people see as a bit false. They're saying, but how can we say 15% across the board? You know, countries have different levels of progress or sophistication when it comes to women's issues. I would say that we're talking about global, we're talking about a global target, but I would argue further that if you don't have a bold target like that, a bold numerical target that you can't hide behind words. That's the only way to get us off this lull when it comes to financing, because as you know, resources are important, and resources are important, for a range of activities in the post-conflict arena. I can give you a few examples from reparations. I think you mentioned the reparations to women who've suffered sexual abuse and other abuses from war. Ending impunity and having a rule of law. So funding, peace-building funding can actually go towards financing these kinds of mechanisms, helping the process for women to bring their cases to court, providing them the assistance. We have cases of legal clinics where we provide women with these assistance so that we end this culture of impunity. The other thing is, of course, security sector reform and DDR, disarmament and reintegration. Again, there, that is a very common way that we fund peace-building activities. You bring the insurgents who have now laid down arms, basically in exchange for cash and some training so that we can reintegrate them into normal life. But there again, a lot of times we find that we focus on the men. And we all know for a fact that it's not, the life of the insurgent in the bush is not without women. If anything, they will kidnap women. They become the cooks. The men don't cook, so they bring these women along, girls, to cook. The sex slaves, they carry us. They carry things on their head as they move from camp to camp. And a lot of times I find that in DDR programs, we suddenly forget about them. We just worry about the one with a gun who's willing to put down the arm and get the cash and move on happily. Not happily, but move on. So anyway, so properly designed peace-building funding can actually do something for the girls in the DDR process. And then also in civil society. I mean, we keep talking about, women needing to participate, and yet we know for a fact that they need the resources, they need the training, they need the wherewithal in order to participate. We can't just say, women participate and it will happen. I think that's very clear, and that's what this kind of peace-building funding can go towards. And then lastly, of course, the whole question of microcredit, especially in agriculture and small business and trading. A lot of situations, in societies coming out of conflict, providing this kind of a funding. And I think one of the most successful ones, Atul, is the one in Côte d'Ivoire, what we call the 1000 Microcredit, which is really a model in the sense that 50% of all the projects that were started are still going on today, 3 years later, 2-3 years later. And actually, it's no, when we talk about employment, we're not talking about Nike coming in and creating lots of jobs in the factory. We're really talking about self-employment. We're talking about when a society comes out of war, and let's say the farmer is able to farm, so he or she has a little bit of extra to sell, and thus want the cash to buy certain things that they normally would not have. And these are very simple things, like going to a blacksmith to repair the bucket, because people don't throw things away in these cultures. They keep everything, including the bucket with a big hole in it. So you bring it to a blacksmith. The long distances, sometimes they have to go long distances to clinics and etc. So the motorbike taxi is, again, another very practical kind of activity that we fund. And again, as I said, so all these are basically businesses servicing each other as people come out of war and start demanding these services. And then hopefully the virtuous cycle begins, and the local economy, for lack of one before, suddenly sort of springs into place. So these are the nice stories. The other action point that our report came up with is this whole question of quotas. This is a very contentious issue in the UN, because to say that we should have quotas for women in parliament, for instance, is a very contentious issue because countries will say, but that goes against our culture, while you're pushing the Western agenda. So we're very careful in the way we word this. We're not saying that we recommend that these post-conflict countries come up with quotas, but that we share the best practices of those who have, i.e. the Rwandas, the Burundis, the Mozambiques, the East Timor we heard today. These are all the countries coming out of conflict, and because of the vision of the leader, had set quotas for women's participation in politics and governance. And because quotas were set in all of these countries, as you check in all the various UNIFEM websites, make up more than 50% of women, of members of parliament. So women make up more than 50% of members of parliament. And why is it important? It's important for two reasons. One, when you have a minimum critical mass of women in power and in decision, legislation tends to get passed that favor women. So if you look at these countries again, because of the minimum critical mass of women in parliament, we have land laws, we have inheritance laws that are passed that are a lot more gender friendly. And secondly, is another maybe more poignant reason, which is that, we read about all these rapes in Eastern Congo and we all decry it and everybody's, but as long as women do not occupy a place in public life, women are not seen in public life as figures with brains, with power, with decision-making rights. As long as women are not seen as that, as long as women are seen as, women like Betty, how much stronger can one get? As long as women are seen as objects, I'm sure there are many other reasons and many different ways that we can stop this kind of abuse of women. But my hunch is that once you have more women in public life, the more we will be able to move away from this horrible situation. And here I'd like to end by just quoting what Mark Lyle Grant, the Perm Rep from UK, says. He says that women's participation in peace building is not about women's participation per se, it's about effective peace building. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to tell you that, Barbara, forgive me if I just give the floor again to Jürgen, who has to leave. And I was wondering if students had questions to ask about the Security Council, about tomorrow morning, about what has been achieved, because we are going to lose our speaker very soon. So perhaps we could do it this way, and Barbara will conclude, really, by giving us the voices from the field. Is there any question? Or yes? Okay. Do you want to go to the micro?
Hi, my name is Adeline Lowe. Thank you so much for coming here to speak. I have a question just in terms of how you present and persuade the UN Security Council. When it comes to saying that there should be more women and there should be more women participating and being agents of change at the table making decisions, versus someone who might say, well, how do you know that 50% of the population, these women, want to be in these positions, and that it's an issue of selection bias as opposed to an issue of serious underrepresentation of a very important part of society. So what do you say to these people, and how do you persuade them against thinking in that direction?
Is that a question for the Security Council?
No, it's a question for
Jürgen.
Jürgen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Would you like to answer this? Yes. Is there a second question? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ann Adams. I have a question about using UN Security Council Resolution 1325 for countries that are not post-conflict. So, and how it's applicable. A country like Burma, for example, is something as a country that's very much in conflict. A comprehensive peace agreement hasn't been developed. Something like that has happened, but yet there is so much use of rape as a weapon of war systematically. But you hear very little about applying 1325 to that context. Burma context.
Another question? Yes. You have to go to the microphone.
I'm Vladimir Olarte. I would like to know how this initiative of indicators to measure women's equality, empowerment, and efforts in peacekeeping operations complements with other initiatives, and also what are some of the main dimensions that are being measured, and how we're making in general like progress towards these dimensions. Like.
Okay. Yes. Can you take a last one? Yeah. Okay.
I had one other question, and you mentioned that one of the issues was often a lack of information or a lack of numbers that the Security Council couldn't know, and that hence putting in new indicators will also help strengthen the reporting. Having worked in Eastern Congo and having spent a lot of time trying to get information, trying to get numbers, I'm a bit curious to hear, or I'm a bit surprised to hear that there's a lack of knowledge and reporting and numbers, because there's a lot of data being collected. So where does it get lost?
Perhaps you want to start with the last question.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for those questions. I think they're all highly relevant, and I will really start with the last one. And first, I don't think that we do not always have a lack of information, but it's sometimes difficult to build the case, and we need information to build the case, because you have to take into account the Security Council does not only consist of a few like-minded countries. The Security Council has 15 members. So basically everything that the Security Council decides at the end of the day has to find the support of the whole council. And the problem that we sometimes have, and that's also maybe linked to the first question on how we make the case for having more women participation, is that we really have to sometimes demonstrate that it does make a difference to have women at the table, that we have to demonstrate the scope and the specificities of sexual violence in a certain area, because not everybody will always be convinced that this is really the case. So this is why we need this information, and this is why it can really help us for our work on the council. On how Resolution 1325 applies to other member states that are not in conflict, or I mean we had a long discussion about that today actually. 1325 applies to all countries. So 1325 has provisions that explicitly call for countries that are not in armed conflict to support the implementation. I mean, my own country, we are not in armed conflict, thank God, but we have an important role to play when it comes to do training, to maybe do capacity building for women that can then work in peace processes, that can assist all those processes. We have an important work to do when it comes to our development cooperation, to make sure that our development cooperation is consistent with what we advocate for in Resolution 1325. So I think there are various contexts in which 1325 will be relevant for various member states. And then, of course, I mean, we had this big discussion on whether the application of the indicators today should be linked or should be limited to situations on the Council's agenda. But also here, very often you can, if you look at this information over time and you see that the situation of women deteriorates, the levels of violence rise, and you have significant changes there, this can be the sign that we are heading for serious trouble in a certain region. And that's why the Council should become active. And I do agree with Betty very much that just information is not going to change anything. Because what is really going to change something in the end is the political will that has to be there. But I think that applies to everything that the Council does, and you can imagine that there are various interests with various member states that unfortunately sometimes make it difficult to really come to that will. But I think when we're talking about participation, I think it's very, very important that women sit at the table. And I think it's equally important, and that's why I'm happy to see a few more men in this room, that also we take that up, because that is really something where we can all make a difference. When those issues are on the table, they are serious, and we have to take them serious as well. And I think that also, this is not an agenda for women only, it's an agenda that we all have to take up, and maybe also more awareness in coming generations will also really help to consistently take that up. I think we also have to change our mind on this, because it's also very much a question of how we approach this and a question of mindset, and something that you can all do in your future positions. Hold decision makers accountable for that and make sure that they do talk about women's issues.
Thank you very much. I think, Betty, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add maybe on what Yogana said. The question of 1325, although it is used a lot to refer to people from conflict or post-conflict situations, I think sometimes when we sit in Africa, when we sit in Sudan, we look at America, and then we look at these things going up in the TV. There's a lot of sexual violence happening here. And there's a lot of sexual violence happening in Europe, everywhere. So 1325 also applies here. Women here needs to begin to talk about it and begin to campaign against it. And the participation, it is very important to have the critical mass in order to change things, particularly in terms of women. One man can say a thing and everybody will accept, but it needs maybe 10 women to say the same thing which one man has said to change things. I give you the example of financing for gender equality in Southern Sudan. Until we women came together as women and had symposiums and wrote our priorities and decided to move to the donor conference in big numbers, we were not noted. But when they saw these women are organizing this conference in big numbers, then they said, oh, let's listen to them. And when they listen to them, we listen to us and we say, this is the voice of the women, not the voice of Betty. Then they started taking notice. So critical mass for women is really very important. However, critical mass should be meaningful critical mass. It should not be just shouting for the sake of having women together. The women should research into their interest. Women should research into how they can impact on what is going on so that they can change. What you said about selection bias is really very true, where women just come out of war. Because during war, men like women. They would say, oh, do this, you shout this so that the world can hear that war is happening here, that the world can hear this thing is happening and it is not good. As soon as that war is over, men would just decide, women, you are not educated enough to sit on the table, so you cannot decide, or you are not educated enough to be a minister, so you cannot lead the country. Then, if women insist, they will then start on selection bias. You'll see men beginning to pick the women they know, even if these women don't have the capacity. But simply because they know these women, or simply because these women, if they are put in that position, they cannot shout, they cannot talk, they cannot criticize what is going on. So selection bias happens a lot immediately after conflict. It will take time again until the women gain momentum, until the women gain, raise awareness among themselves, until the women get educated enough to say, no, we want the right woman in the right place. Otherwise, it is always the right woman in the wrong place or the wrong woman in the right place. Thank you.
Barbara, you have the last word.
Some bad news, but also some encouraging things. First of all, I couldn't agree with Betty more on two counts. One of the things I found everywhere I went, and I'll talk a little bit about these countries I visited, is that the Security Council and 1325 are very far away, and in fact, in some ways the understanding of a responsibility to protect, which is an issue we haven't talked about here, is more sort of inherently understood than a Security Council resolution. And there's a lot of concern about top-down decision-making and top-down action plans and all those things that are not working from the bottom up, which is Betty's good point also about critical mass. And out of critical mass comes not only just, physical bodily power, as these Liberian women surrounded the peace negotiators and basically said, we're going to stay here until you come out with an agreement. But it also is a school. I mean, these were a lot of market women, poor women, illiterate women in Liberia, and it's a school for them, because out of that came some people now who are doing really interesting work. They also, as a campaign, as a critical mass, got the first woman elected president in Africa. So I think that's an extremely important thing. Now about this report, this is the United Nations Population Fund annual report called State of World Population, and it's a gamble. They asked me to go, we wouldn't write this from here or from academia, if you'll excuse the slight, but let the people out there who are in the areas of conflict as far down in the society as you can go talk about their own experiences and what they understand to be their possibilities. So it was really people versus governments talking. And, everywhere I went, I mean, I had a lot of help from the UN, but to meet people, and also some of these places I had been or worked before. But everywhere I went, the instinct is to say, oh, you better talk to the minister. And the minister sometimes had an entirely different view of things. In one country, in Africa, someone was complaining about nothing being done, a woman working with other women, and I said, but your government has an action plan, and she said, show me. So, there's a rather different view of whether these things should be imposed from the top down, because governments don't always, they sign things, they agree to things, they write things, they put on seminars. But this doesn't always trickle down. I'll talk a bit about what I learned and where I went, and what some of the lessons were in every place. They were different, but in some ways there were themes, and that's what we did. I started out in Liberia, which I must say was probably the most positive, with the exception of Timor-Leste, which is a smaller place, the most positive environment and the most enthusiasm and a maintained idea of possibility among the women in Liberia, and it was really an enormously interesting start to this, because in many ways I kept looking back to Liberia as an example. It's everything there, including the restoration. They're trying to restore the university, which was once one of Africa's greatest, and the idea being that this is more than just they're now some years from the end of this conflict, but that it's also restoring the intellectual life of a country, and through the university, and also providing the professional, technical, and cultural leadership of a country, which can never be imported from outside. So the idea of building the society in a holistic way was very strong. And the huge obstacles, grinding poverty. I think 3% of the country had electricity. There were basically no doctors. I mean, a lot of the doctors had come from outside and were working on, short-term things, NGOs, international medical teams, and these people have no, permanent stake in the country. So one of the things they were going to do is establish a medical school at the University of Liberia. But they're, of course, having trouble getting money, because people look at post-conflict and say, well, it's got to be tents or water or some other thing like that. And for the president, who came from Rutgers as a dean and came back to Liberia to try to kickstart the university again, got $21 million from China to build a new campus on the outside of town, and it's really going to be spectacular. It was almost finished when I saw it. I went to Uganda. After that, Uganda, because I stayed up in the Gulu area in the north, which Betty will know because she was involved in those peace negotiations. where the Lord's Resistance Army really ran wild, and her horrific stories. I talked to several of the mothers whose daughters were literally kidnapped, skipping off to school in the morning, and were not ever seen again, or came back, sometimes completely destroyed kind of in their psychological ability to reconnect, but also pregnant or with children from their years in the bush, or even just months in the bush. After that, I went to Bosnia. Now, Bosnia was very interesting for several reasons. In a way, it's where the march to 1325 began, because sexual violence has always been part of war. Boys will be boys kind of mentality. It's sort of loot. You know, you go and take the gold and the women or whatever from ancient times onward. But in Bosnia, from 1992 to 1995, 94 anyway, there were rape camps. This is Europe at the end of the 20th century, and really horrific tortures carried out on women, and so there was a war crimes tribunal. It's still in existence for the former Yugoslavia, and followed by the War Crimes Tribunal for Rwanda, followed by the treaty that established the International Criminal Court, and then came 1325. I'm not saying it was a progression of steps, but the time was right, because rape and sexual assault of all kinds had been declared an international war crime before 1325 was passed. So this was a part of a trend. The other thing about Bosnia that was really pretty appalling is that 15 years after a final peace agreement, there are still many, many tens of thousands of women who have not been either compensated, forgiven, or reintegrated into society. It was the saddest group of people I think I met anywhere in the world on this trip. And again, this is Europe in the 21st century. So these wars are, and I'll get to the reason I think why it's this way in Bosnia. And then I went to Timor-Leste, East Timor, a very small new country. Joined the UN in 2002. He was there 3 years. He knows much more about this than I do. He was running the place. We used to say the viceroy, but you know.
No, never.
Okay. Now, Timor is an outlier in some ways, in many ways. You know, it's poor but not. I mean, it's got potential for huge wealth because of gas and oil in the Timor Gap between Australia and. In fact, it's already being processed. However, the Australians are getting most of the jobs and doing most of the high technological work. So, Jeffrey Sachs was there when I was there and talked about how they have to really think this through. There has to be a better way to divide this, but there also has to be a way for Timor to create jobs out of this potentially huge bonanza of energy sources. So he was advising them on lots of things and they're in the lovely position of being able to future plan. That is to say, you know, we need roads? We're going to build housing now before we even need it. It's one of the highest fertility rates in the world. I think they're right up there with Niger almost. And so the population's growing very fast. It's a youthful population without jobs. And so on. So it's a very interesting. Then further on the positive side, it has met the 20% goal. That's probably had something to do with you. Of women in the national police. And that's important because you can have as many peacekeepers or whatever who are female, but the national police, the people who get called out, you know, when there's domestic violence or whatever, 20% women. But a wonderful UN police advisor there on gender, Rita Reddy, from Malaysia, told me that, you know, that's great, but you go to the police stations and, you know, for example, the woman comes into work one day and there's no chair at her desk. Some police officer has taken her car. Pregnant women are resented because, I mean, all the police are of an age group where these things happen. And so there are no uniforms designed. They refuse to design uniforms for pregnant police women, and there's sort of general, you know, niggling away at their status. So there's still work to do, but the numbers are tremendous, and they have these vulnerable persons units with, I guess outside if it's possible, police stations where women can come and children can come, where the police who may not, have gender sensitivity highest in their minds, where they can be dealt with by women in uniform. Interesting thing is that Rita Reddy told me that sometimes when you get women in police units from the UN units, from developed countries, the North, the global North, particularly Northern Europe, they say, we don't want to babysit the women and children. We want to be out with the boys. We want to carry we want to do. So there are culture shocks on all sides here. But it was for a small country, it was a very, very interesting place because it has so much potential. And they have basically, nobody wants to believe this in the West, forgiven or at least got used to Indonesia. Indonesia has done a lot, and the brutality of that final separation has done a lot to give them scholarships, to help the East Timorese in many ways. So it's a fascinating place. Sort of too small to be on the scale of Uganda or Liberia or some of the other places, but it shows what can be done and how successful the UN has been there. Then I went to the West Bank, the only part of the Palestinian territory I saw. I then did video links with Gaza because it was a time when it was difficult to go across. And I went from January till March, really. No, April. Beginning of May I came back. So that, there wasn't all that much time to do all these places. Anyway, the Palestinian people in the West Bank, this was to look at a different situation with people living under occupation, and the tensions and the setbacks that maternal health care. This was an area where the Palestinians were really quite advanced in health care, and particularly reproductive health, and have had setbacks, serious setbacks, because of the wall, because of the checkpoints, not being able to get to hospitals. One year they had, I don't know how many hundreds of babies born at checkpoints or in the back of cars or on the street, because the women couldn't get to the hospital. And it was, it's improved now, but it was still a place to look at the tensions that arise from what I call prisoners in their own land. And then I took a side trip to Jordan to talk to Iraqi refugees who have come to Jordan, mostly as a result of sectarian fighting beginning in about 2006. And the tremendous tensions under which they also live, because a lot of them don't want to leave Arab culture. They know they're only guests in Jordan. They can't get full-time jobs there. Jordan hasn't signed the Refugee Convention. Most of them are coming to the United States, but there are families that I met who don't want to do that because they think it's just too big a leap out of the Middle East. And they've heard awful things about how hard it is to get a job in the U.S. and these things. And one young man they've tried to put in psychiatric care, and he refused. He's about 16, because he heard that if he went to the U.S., he would be conscripted and have to go back and shoot Iraqis. And if you say to him there is no conscription, it doesn't matter. So this whole family with a very, very qualified father is stuck in a so-so rented apartment in Amman, waiting to go somewhere. Then the last visit was Haiti, and this was because, and I've just come back from there again last week. This was because a huge disaster like this has some of the same hallmarks after the event as a war, a civil war, and so on. So in Haiti, as Atul has said, the UN reacted quickly, but I've talked to the Brazilians who are in charge of peacekeeping there, and basically no one was that. Well, and you were there when the earthquake happened. I've always wanted to ask you where you stayed. My gosh, everything fell down. I was one of those people on the boat. Anyway, in Haiti, so they weren't ready. So that what you needed was heavy earth. You needed the Army Corps of Engineers, heavy earth moving equipment, everything. And the peacekeepers weren't there for that. I mean, this wasn't. So, and then you lost. The whole UN mission was decapitated, basically. So more than 100 people killed. All right, quickly what we learned, because if you have any questions, we'll run out of time. People on the scene everywhere are not afraid to talk about culture change. We are. Outsiders are, but they aren't. domestic violence, the rape, sexual assault is on the rise, including in East Timor, and in Liberia, and in a lot of other places. And it's something that people say, this is something our society is going to have to fix ourselves. So that was a very interesting thing. How long it takes to recover, as I said, and how important the community is. You know, in Bosnia, some of these women came back brutally abused. They came home, they were thrown out by their families for dishonoring the Bosniaks, for dishonoring the family. And so, I mean, that has put them into 20, 15, sometimes more than 15 years of total breakdown. And for a lot of these women, the best years of their lives are gone. They have not much reparation help, a little bit of money, but you know, the horror goes on in their heads, and the stories are terrible. Quickly, if I can, a couple of things else I learned. The era of gender roles is changing for various reasons. Partly the women's campaigns, the critical mass that Betty talks about, but also, and among people I met in Uganda, for example, in the NGOs, young women trained in law or medicine or something, coming up in local NGOs to really take charge. And they know the culture, they know what works, they know what they can do. And they're internet savvy, and they've got connections all around. They may be feminists within their societies, but they know how they have to present that in order to. A police chief told me in some place that they were having a lot of trouble with violence. He said, if you use the word empowerment, however you translate it, it scares men, and this is not the way to start. But a lot of the local women's groups and so on are doing well. Partly this is the change in some of the things that happen in conflict. One of the things everyone talked about was how women come out of conflict sometimes in worse shape within relationships, because the man in an IDP camp or a refugee camp or in a war comes home and finds that his wife has taken care of the family, has gone out and made herself a little business selling whatever she can find to make just a few more cents or dollars on, and he's threatened. Often this raises the violence in the family, and sometimes the women come back and say, look, I can handle this. I mean, I'm taking charge of the farm, and which they do anyway, but and so these tensions arise. But also about men, the interesting thing is that a lot of research is now being done on the violence against men. And in northern Uganda, there were men coming from Congo to be interviewed by refugee people from UNHCR and other NGOs and private voluntary groups who had been brutally abused. I've recorded some of this in here. Microcredit University in Kampala has a refugee law center which has done a lot of work on the damage to men, humiliated in front of their families, also wounded by being forced to watch their wives or children being raped, and in general have themselves, as I said, been abused in many ways. It in many ways goes to the heart of the issue, why this happens in war, and what 1325 and subsequent resolutions have looked at as sexual assault as a tactic of war, or even a strategy of war, to completely humiliate, undercut, destroy the dignity of whole communities. And there's not time to talk about all the various ways this happens, but and it happens now. I'm reading now in the DRC, and you've just been there. So in Congo, I gather it's also sometimes just to clear the territory so they can mine. They can do mining because these rebel armies can make money from mining. So this is even an economic tactic in the sense that we talk about heroin or opium in Afghanistan. These people are mining gold, and this.
That's right.
Yeah. Used in electronic, yeah.
Used in electronic mobiles.
Right. So, just to sort of sum it up, the UN can't do everything everywhere, and you've heard the figures about the size of literally the size of the territory, the number of people, and And so it's very important that the government understands its responsibilities and its role. And I don't know where we stand now in the Security Council on Congo and the mandate, but the Congolese government actually wants the UN out of there, and yet doesn't have, and some of their soldiers are involved in rape. You know, people said to me, what did people tell you about peacekeepers? Almost everywhere I went, no one raised the issue of peacekeepers being violent. I mean, there are cases, we all know them, but the local situation is so overwhelmingly larger and worse that that this seemed like a minor irritant, and so it was many people there were more interested in having their government take charge. So as women are central to peace, to development and to peace, and they can't do that, play that role unless they're safe and secure and have some rights and legal protection, as Judy was talking about. The head of UNFPA, who's about to retire after 2 terms, Thoraya Obaid, likes to use the phrase continuum, that you have to go from war to recovery to development and all the things that come with it without chopping this up and having to go to countries and saying, okay, give us help, you know, we have a disaster. Give us help, we have a recovery period. Give us help, we want development projects. And often these things have been divided up. And I think this is one of the things you wrote, wasn't it, Elizabeth, and she wrote a really good report on Haiti, which has held... My student wrote the book, excuse me, they wrote a really good report. So that everything from the economy to the rule of law to women's reproductive rights, in many places these people have no access to family planning, and they don't like to see their children die if they have too many, and maternal mortality is very high in these same countries with high fertility. So everything is like a great ball of string, and security is certainly, you know, the protective shell.
Thank you very much, Barbara. This was really quite moving, and I don't know how we can have a better account of what's happened to women than from Barbara, who has traveled to so many places. You have listened a lot. You probably want to speak. So please go to the microphone and ask questions to our speakers. We have heard so much tonight. You know, it's a kind of mixed picture, but I would just say one thing, is that in a way, this is always the case with the United Nations. The UN is very good at pushing norms, and I think there has been progress on the normative evolution of the Security Council on this, even though it's not perfect. Where the problem comes is the implementation. And I just want to finish this by saying, well, the last 10 years have been on the norm setting, so to speak, and the normative framework for women. Will the next 10 years be on the implementation? And that is really has also a lot to do with the Council. So if you are coming to the Council tomorrow, listen very carefully at the statements and what the Council is going to say, particularly about these indicators. And now you have the floor. Go to the microphone, ask questions. You have so many good speakers here and so many different points of view. So.
First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out and sharing your experiences with us. This question is specifically for Judy. You spoke a lot about the need to sort of mainstream the gender component into ex-combatants and even integrate the idea that there are female ex-combatants that come along with every war. What recommendations do you have to sort of mainstream that?
Okay. Can we take another question? Mm-hmm. If there is a question for peacekeeping, ASG Carrie has to leave for a dinner, so please start with those.
Thank you. It was deeply moving. My question is more organizational and along the lines of how do we make this happen once we have the normative framework. And Mozambique and Rwanda were mentioned as 2 good examples where progress is happening. And they also happen to be one of the 8 pilot countries under UN 1 UN. So I'm just wondering if you see potential under a different structure, whether, I mean, the goals can be promoted in a more cohesive and, you know, better coordinated way.
Hi, I do have a question for ASG Carrie. You touched on this briefly in terms of speaking about the difficulty of policing some of these huge areas like the DRC or the Sudan with very, very limited resources. And I think you touched briefly on the idea of engaging people from outside the peacekeeping community in terms of specifically being able to prevent things like sexual violence. Are there specific plans that DPKO has in terms of engaging civil society in countries like DRC to expand your reach and basically be able to get better information about this? And as a corollary to that, I guess you could say, there's a big debate, I think, in the UN about whether or not to use the MRM from Children in Armed Conflict and apply it to sexual violence against women. Do you in particular, or DPKO, what is your stance on that debate? Should it be used, or should there be a separate system developed? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and my apologies to everybody that I would have to leave this very interesting discussion in a short while. Let me begin from the MRM. I personally believe that any type of monitoring and reporting mechanism always helps in two ways. First and foremost, it focuses our attention on the problem which we are trying to monitor and report on. And secondly, of course, it gives us some objectively valid data over a period of time to realize whether our initiatives are working, not working, they are business as usual, or whether there are some good practices. Along with Margot Wallström, with whom I work very closely, we have been working on what we call an inventory of best practices. And there are many best practices. For example, let me give you an example in DRC. In order to promote normal commercial business in the villages, a practice was started to escort the villagers to, or the village traders, if you like, to a particular marketplace twice a week. And that is going on. And that has helped, in fact. Or, for example, the escorts, which are sometimes undertaken, particularly for vulnerable women, when they go out to gather, say, for example, water. And if they have to travel 3 or 4 kilometers to gather water, that's the time when they are most vulnerable. Of course, the other alternative is to try and find a water source nearby. I mean, this is one of the challenges which has been worked upon in Darfur, but it requires more than peacekeeping. On cooperation with other partners, absolutely, yes. In fact, one of the examples which I was giving of establishing some sort of a, early warning 911 type of system, if you like, in places like Congo, and that will be done with Caritas, in fact, with the church. So the pastor or the local evangelical leader in the village would have a mobile phone, because you can't distribute mobile phones to the whole village, and would then become the focal point for contact with us. And those things are happening. But at the same point of time, I must also say that no matter how much you expand the reach, we must, while expanding the reach, also try and find solutions which are socio-economic and political in nature, which lead to enhancement of the judicial system, which strengthen the fight against impunity, because ultimately the society has to develop. I mean, for example, the case which of the country where I was before, Timor-Leste, which was being mentioned, and I want to close there with a different example, and it is not a facetious example, it is something true, which happened to me in the last year of my stay there. A person, a male, came up to me after the domestic violence bill was adopted, subsequent to our great efforts, and subsequent to the efforts, first and foremost, of the Timorese, to complain to the SRSG that the women police officers who were manning the vulnerable persons unit were not recording his complaint because he was being beaten up by his wife, who happened to be a policewoman. And we checked, and that was true. That was true, and I asked the vulnerable persons unit, why are you not recording his complaint? They said, no, there is no complaint, there is no basis. Because this man comes home drunk, doesn't do any work, the wife is the policewoman who is doing the work, and then starts fighting and speaking in a loud voice. So obviously, we have to beat him up a little bit. And I had to tell them that, look here, I think I agree with your broad principle, but don't try to become a judge and a police person at the same time. I mean, do record a complaint, dude. But I think with all these efforts at empowerment, at the efforts which Barbara was talking about, I think there is a possibility for a change. And that change is the societal change which we are seeking. Peacekeeping provides a transient window of opportunity for stability for that change to take root, but it cannot supplant the change. That is impossible. The change will be internal to the society itself, indeed, as Barbara was saying. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
I think you had a question.
The question on DDR, I mean, let's be very honest. In these post-conflict societies, unemployment is the norm. You all know the statistic of Liberia, for instance. I think unemployment is over 83% or 85%. So these situations are characterized by poverty, abject poverty, and by low prospects, low opportunities for employment. So it's not as if that we're going to bring people back to the employment levels that they had. It was even during regular times it was not that good. It's just that the war made it even worse. So then what does one do? As I said, these DDR programs, if they are designed well, the problem is a lot of times they're not well designed nor implemented, as you said. And thus you lose the momentum. The key there, I would say, is the speed. The first thing is speed. When people feel that they're ready to lay down arms and they want to give a chance at trying a normal life, you have to grab the opportunity. We all know in this, for instance, in the Great Lakes, in the Burundi, and the whole area, it is to hire an insurgent is a cell phone call away. So we know the stories of in Burundi where a lot of ex-insurgents felt that their needs were not met. Before you knew it, they were recruited back into Congo, and they were, it's not standing for anything. It's a job. It's a terrible job because they don't get paid when they basically get the spoils once they have run through a particular village, and that means stealing whatever people had and raping the women. But as opposed to having nothing, a lot would subscribe to this kind of recruitment, and that's why we have this very fragile situation of recruitment of these young men, and they just turn over. And that's why I say speed is very important, because once you feel that there is a sentiment to these very hardened young men that I've met many of, you have to strike where the opportunity is hot. You have to provide the cantonment or cantonment of these people, provide the facility where people can come, and then obviously there's usually a cache for the weapons that they produce. And then you must canton them. You must put them in this closed area, and then the next steps. And next steps are usually doing some very basic training. And when, for instance, in Burundi, when I was there, they were already doing the road repair. So you train them in road repair, canal repair, all these things. But just to get Kyrgyzstan, for instance, that's what we're doing. Just to get all these angry young men off the streets, idle, angry young men off the streets. And then, of course, it doesn't end there. Then, of course, that is just like a period, 2-3 months, where you train them to these public works. Then must come the next step of, during that period, as I said, there's a sophistication in how you implement these programs. The good implementer would then look at the skill sets of these people, what their aptitudes are. Not everybody can be a farmer, not everybody can be a trader. So you look at people's aptitudes, do some kind of screening, and then provide the training and the microcredit, and then hope for the best. But that's about it.
I think this is such an important point, because if you look at all the conflicts like Liberia, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, but so many others, you have this very young population and you have no job. And if you look at Sierra Leone, for instance, the cause of the war was from people, young people, angry. And the same in a way for Liberia. And we are back now to the situation which provoked the war, where you have lots of young people who don't have jobs. And I really admire what you are doing and what you just described, because you have this vicious circle and this timing, which is so important, where okay, you can't start agriculture because it's still mine, but you can't demine because the security situation is not there. But you can't have the security situation because the political process is not going on. Because the political process is not working, nobody wants to give weapons. And here you go. And how do you create jobs in time so that doesn't happen again is really daunting. I think it's one of the most difficult sides of peace building. And if you look around at all these conflicts, it's post-war conflict, they all are, and look at Haiti, they are all struggling with the issue of jobs for young men and young people. I don't even want to talk about jobs for women. But it's really difficult. And no matter how much we learn and how much we try and how, we bump our heads against this issue. And there is no proceed because there are sanctions on diamonds, so you can't create jobs and this and that, and here we go. And so you can't transform the vicious circle into a virtuous cycle, so to speak. So this is a good research for you students if you want to look at all this, because we still have so much to learn. I wonder if Betty, if I were going to ask you, last three speakers, what do you want to see happening tomorrow morning in the Security Council? Betty, what would you say?
Well, maybe I would say something a little bit before I say what I would like to see tomorrow. On the DDR, I think the rehabilitation is the difficult part. Because when they come to rehabilitation part, they look at the men only. Women are always left out. Even women who are associated with conflict, or women who became part of conflict because they were abducted, or normally they are not assessed, so they are not included in the rehabilitation. So the work of civil society is also very important to bring up these issues, so that when there is any rehabilitation, women also get the opportunity to be rehabilitated similar to men. What would I like to see tomorrow? For me, as a person coming from Southern Sudan, referendum is my agenda. So I would like the Security Council to have more stronger, bolder statements on referendum, because Sudan is a member state, and Sudan will be there. So it is very important that the Security Council should say boldly that we don't want any more war. You should work out the differences, and the political will should be there. This is what I would like to see tomorrow. Thank you.
So watch the language. Watch the language tomorrow. If the council says we are deeply concerned, they start like this. Or if they say need to further consider, rather than saying demands, authorizes, watch those words, because in the Security Council there is lots, of rhetoric coming.
Deeply concerned is, it makes no meaning really. You can be deeply concerned. Then what next? We want something that is really, we demand that the governments, because there are two governments in Sudan, should do this and that. We demand that the women, children and vulnerable people of Sudan are protected. We demand security for the people of Sudan during the referendum. This is what I would like to see tomorrow. Thank you.
So we want to hear what Judy wanted to see tomorrow happening in peace building. Yeah, walk the talk is what we would like to see the council do. I just want to thank all the speakers who have left.